So, good evening, everyone. I'd like to go ahead and get us started here, and sure there'll be time afterwards to catch up. Mostly, I recognize our parishioners. Might be a couple of people visiting from other parishes. I'm the pastor, Father Anthony Soroki, and so our speaker today, Dr. Sottosanti, I got to know his daughter-in-law when I was a lawyer. So she was my mentor attorney when I was a summer associate at Shepherd Mullen. At the time, I think she was engaged and almost about to marry his son, Mark. This was back in 98, I think, 1998. So, and then I was asked to be chaplain for a group of Catholic businessmen called Legatus. So there's a San Diego chapter. And I ended up several times during the dinner time sitting next to John and Margaret, his wife. And then he starts telling me, I'm writing a book. I'm like, oh, really? It's interesting. So, and I didn't know anything. No, I didn't know anything about his faith journey. I knew he was practicing Catholic. And then, so we're sitting, he's telling me about it, and he's like, well, do you mind reading a chapter and just let me know what you think? And so he sent me one chapter, and I read it, and I think the first chapter he sent me was on the Camino de Santiago, which is something that I did. I walked part of it several years ago, and it was one of the most wonderful experiences of my life. But I didn't experience anything like he experienced. So he experienced the true miracles, which you will hear about, the miracle ultimately is his conversion and how he's been able to influence other people since his conversion, which is what he's going to talk to you about. So just a little bit more by way of background. Dr. John Sottosanti has performed oral surgery for over 40 years in San Diego, California. I just had a root canal, which is, I guess, a little bit different than what you do, but I know. He is the author of many articles in peer-reviewed scientific journals. He has invented products and techniques for bone growth, which he has taught worldwide. He's a former president of the California Society of Periodontists and the San Diego chapter of Legatus, which, as I explained to you, is an international organization of business leaders united in Christ. He has a passion for truth and a strong desire to help others climb above a milieu of sin, mood-enhancing substances, and despair to realize sustained happiness and inner peace. He has been married for over 50 years and has 3 sons and 3 grandchildren. He enjoys edifying books, road cycling, and golf. And before I invite him up here, let's take a moment. We thank you, Heavenly Father, for your many gifts. We thank you for the ways that you are working in our life, in our journey, sometimes even literal journeys, in revealing yourself to us, helping us to understand ourselves better and the purpose of our lives. Thank you for what you've done in John's life. May you be with him now as he is a witness to your marvelous works. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Please welcome Dr. John Sottosanti.
Thank you. Thank you, Father Soroki. Well, most people, whether they admit it or not, want to please their parents. I know as teenagers you would never think that'd be the case. And they also want to be happy. So those are 2 things I think affected my early life. My father was born in Sicily. Anybody ever see the Godfather movie? Can I see a show of hands? I took Dad to the Godfather movie thinking it was a great movie and he would love it. We walk out of the movie theater and he said, I hated that movie. He said, I didn't know anybody like those people. And I've since that time, about that many years ago, I went to Sicily and found wonderful people. Some of you probably have been to Sicily. So anyway, Dad moved to America when he was 6 years old, lost any Italian accent that he had, but he spoke Italian his whole life. Could speak Italian, spoke perfect English as well. But there's always this insecurity. I'm Sicilian, people look down on me, because we grew up in New England. And there's a term in New England, WASP. There are a lot of wasps there. white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And they kind of ruled the government and everything in the country club, et cetera. And if you were Italian, you tended to live in the poorer section of town. So Dad was able to get a civil engineering degree, which I describe how he did that. A little cheating involved in terms of a few things. I won't tell you the details, but he was able to get a civil engineering degree. And he always said to me and my sister, study hard and become a doctor. He was an engineer, but that wasn't good enough. If you're a doctor, he said, you'll have prestige and you'll make a lot of money, which may or may not be true. It depends on what kind of doctor you are and what you do. But that was in the back of my mind, so that was pushing me hard and subconsciously, but. So I ended up getting like 3 degrees and became basically a surgeon, did oral surgery here in the area, actually in Rancho Bernardo in the 70s. And the main thing that, so after I began the practice, I was still obsessed with continuing being successful in different ways. So what I did was I continued to do research at the university. I taught at the university while having a full-time practice in Rancho Bernardo. And I did published articles, and then I became associated with the University of Southern California, and I ran their biggest program of the year in continuing education in my field. And they liked me, and they sent me around the world to lecture. They sent me to Tahiti, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, just all kinds of really neat places. And doing surgery in the morning and maybe in the afternoon every day, and always having lots of patients, that made a fair amount of money. And so I ended up moving in 1980-something to La Jolla. I was able to buy a house overlooking the ocean right where Scripps Pier is. Ultimately, I started 3 side businesses, one business was the practice, which eventually grew to 52 people involved, calling doctors and assistants, et cetera. And then I had 2 other businesses that I started. But I was working, tremendous number of hours. But when you talk to people about being happy, what does it take to be happy? Most people think about career. I want a good job. I mean, that's really, and I had that. And they want money. They want good relationships, which I had. I was married and had three children. But there was so much stress involved because I just thought it was all on my shoulders. And I just had to do everything right. And if I did everything right, everything would work out. I never thought about God. I was raised in a Catholic house in that I did go through baptism and First Communion and confirmation, but it didn't mean anything. The moment I left high school and went off to college and joined a fraternity, there went the religion. And what's interesting is that's what's happening today, right? Isn't it so hard to keep kids going to church? I began experiencing stress. First thing was like neck pain, back pain, sleeplessness, anxiety, et cetera. And I had a partnership with lots of employees, and it became difficult sometimes working things out with the partners. And we would go to Palm Springs every 3 to 4 months for retreats. And I had one coming up, and I was stressed about it. Don't have any idea what the big stress item was, but I was stressed about it. And remember, I said I had a big house. I also had a big car. I had a kind of a stretch Mercedes-Benz, not the full stretch, but a larger Mercedes new type thing with a sunroof. And I'm sitting I remember it like it was yesterday. I'm sitting in the driveway with the sunroof open, looking up at the starry sky, so there was no coastal fog that night. And I'm looking up there and I say, basically, well, let me read it to you since we're talking about book. I think I have it right here. On the Tuesday evening before the retreat, I sat in my Mercedes-Benz in the driveway of my ocean view home, listening to the waves crash on La Jolla shores, experiencing severe mental anguish. Then, as if guided by a cosmic, compassionate presence, I gazed at the stars, polar white against a cloudless dark sky, and peered through the blackest hole into the universe, silently crying out, God, if you're up there, all I want is inner peace. Please help me. I don't know why I chose those particular words, but I certainly wasn't prepared for the sequence of events about to unfold. That's the first time in my entire life when I actually said, I'm not in charge. Up until that moment, I thought I was in charge. I think today, why aren't young people going to church? They think they're in charge, right? Oh yeah, I mean, they don't, no rules or anything. If I don't hurt anybody else, then anything I do is fine. And there's a real tendency to move in that direction with young people. So the very next day, I think about the drive to Palm Springs, and it'd be nice to have a book on tape. So I go to the local bookstore in La Jolla, because I was working, now I had a La Jolla office too. And I go to the rack where they had audio tapes, and I pull out one and bought it. It's called Love is Letting Go of Fear. And I'm listening to it on the way home that evening. The author's name was Gerald Jampolsky. I'm going to read a paragraph. Gerald Jampolsky spoke in a raspy voice like a male Janis Joplin. He told of his Jewish heritage, medical training, psychiatric residency, successful private practice, late model sports car, and beautiful home. After a stressful divorce, he'd become an alcoholic and, like me, experienced debilitating neck and back pain. This had kept him from playing tennis, a sport he loved. Then someone had given him a spiritual self-help book. I read one page, he explained, and in that one page, I heard for the first time a little inner voice saying, "Physician, heal thyself. This is your way home." Immediately, he experienced a sense of oneness with the world. There was no separation, only love, and a feeling that he was to serve God his entire life. Interesting, after hearing that tape, gave it to my partner, listened to the tape. We had the best relationship after a meeting like that. And within a few days, he knocks on my door, which is highly unusual. Open the door, and he's got a package for me, and in the package is a book. It wasn't the book, that on tape. It's a different book, but related. And I open it up, and it was the publisher. I'm always curious who's the publisher. Published by the Foundation of Inner Peace. The exact words that I used. I mean, yeah, you're all going to say it's a coincidence. What do you think I said? Oh, what a coincidence. Except that it started a series of unbelievable coincidences. And obviously in a 45-minute talk or so, you're not going to hear all those little coincidences. But what I'm going to do is go ahead 10 years and tell you that that was step one of deciding that there was a God. I wasn't sure of how to worship that God, but that God was in charge. Then I started reading the Bible. My wife got me enrolled in a Bill Creasy's 5-year Bible study course. Anybody here with Bill Creasy's 5-year Bible study course? Got involved with that. Now, I'm sure that helped. Now, Margaret's dragging me to, I shouldn't say dragging. In the beginning, maybe it was dragging. But I was going to church. But one of my buddies said he saw that I was a little too stressed and a little too anxious at times and a little bit too wanting to control everything. And my ego is up there in the sky along with the stars. And so what happened was that I went to a Cursillo weekend. He said, you should go to a Cursillo weekend. That's going to really help you. I had no idea. Because I didn't have a relationship with Jesus Christ at all. I mean, Christ, yeah, okay. Catholic Church, Christ, but it just didn't have a lot of meaning. But on that weekend, anybody go to Cursillo weekend? A Cursillo weekend, men and women type thing? It was a wonderful experience. And on that weekend, there was a man whose first name is Michael. Michael was the rector, the head of the weekend. He was 6'4". He looked like a linebacker for a professional football team. really a guy that I absolutely admired, and the book goes into what I learned on the Cursillo weekend. So that was one thing that happened is like I met Mike, and then I became friends with a fellow by the name of John Bowen, who's a good Catholic down in Coronado. And talking to John Bowen on the phone, and John says, I said, John, let's have our annual luncheon together. And he said, I said, you're free at all? He said, oh, I'm free for 6 weeks. I said, why? He said, my wife's walking across, she's going to be in Spain for 6 weeks. I said, really? Is she taking a course in language? Or? No, she's walking across Spain. I said, well, who's she walking across Spain with? She's walking by herself. And I'm trying to envision my wife going to Spain, walking across Spain, on this little trail, not knowing where she's going to sleep at night, and sometimes you get lost and it's dark and everything else. And he said, no, you don't know about the Camino de Santiago? No, I didn't know anything about the Camino de Santiago. So being a type A personality, and Amazon was just kind of getting popular, I went on Amazon and I ordered 5 books on the Camino de Santiago. Kind of skimmed through them all. And one of them was like an encyclopedia. Okay, that's what I'm doing when my son calls. I'm looking through this book and my son calls. He says, Dad, I've got some bad news. Now, Father already mentioned Martha, my daughter-in-law. He said, well, I knew that Martha had had 2 miscarriages. And that was psychologically very difficult for everybody involved, obviously Martha particularly. And he said, we just came back from the doctor and I have some bad news. He says we most likely will never be able to have children. One of the chapter titles in my book is La Familia e Tutto. La Familia e Tutto. The family is everything. Lots of kids, family, very, very important. And all of a sudden, I only had 3 sons, but only one married, and only one that I think is going to get married. You never know. And I can't have children. So I'm reading through the book, and within a very short period of time, I come to a chapter and found out that Queen Isabella Ferdinand sent Columbus across the ocean in 1492. Well, somewhere around late 1470s or so, she wanted a son to be the heir to the throne. She had a daughter 7 years, tried to have a son immediately afterwards, and 7 years go by, and she doesn't get pregnant. Then she gets pregnant. She miscarries and was devastated. Okay, what happened in the early 1400s, somebody decided that this man who was buried along the Camino in a little town now called by his name, San Juan de Ortega, they decided he should be a saint because he spent his whole lifetime helping pilgrims. The Camino de Santiago just didn't start. It started in the year 900 when they found St. James' bones. So for hundreds of years, people are walking across Spain. There's no antibiotics. There's no bridges. They're having to wade or swim across rivers. It was a very difficult situation. Anyway, when they opened the casket up, honeybees flew out. And there was a sweet odor coming out of it. And word got out that he, because of the honeybees, would be a saint you would pray for if you wanted to have children. And evidently some women had done that and got pregnant and had children. So she goes to the tomb and prays. Immediately, within weeks, got pregnant, had a son, and was so dedicated to the saint and believed the saint had caused that pregnancy to not only occur, but to go to fruition. She named the son Juan. If you want to look it up, his name is Juan of Asturias. Unfortunately, died at age 28, but he basically was the male heir that she wanted. She went back to the tomb to pray for another child a year later after she prayed for Juan, and she got pregnant. And she had a daughter. She named the daughter Juana. Now, how dedicated can you be to a saint? So this is all sinking in when after Mark had talked to me, so I'm thinking, boy, maybe I ought to go. I knew Martha wasn't going to go pray, at the saints too. But I said, maybe I ought to go do that. But it was in the back of my mind. Then I found out my friend, Michael, who was the rector of my Cursillo weekend a few years earlier, came down with stage 3 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Basically, it's a very bad diagnosis. So because of me going to Cursillo, I got involved in a Cursillo group that met on a regular basis. One of the best things about Cursillo is it isn't just a weekend, it can be a lifetime. I've actually been grouping with a bunch of guys almost every Thursday morning for 20 years, you can imagine. So when you talk about faith and how to find faith, because I found it on the Camino, but it wouldn't have stayed there had I not really got involved with church and really got involved with the Cursillo group. So we were at our morning breakfast, and Mike's sitting across from me looking very pale. I had been to a healing mass for him. He takes off his baseball hat, and he used to have a big head of black hair, and he's totally bald. He said, I just got off of chemo and radiation. And out of the clear blue, almost like the Holy Spirit talking to me, I said to him, Mike, you want to do the Camino de Santiago with me? He said, are you crazy? He said, I cannot walk around the block. You want me to walk across Spain 500 miles? I said, no, I don't. I can't get 6 weeks off from work. I want you to ride a bicycle across Spain 500 miles. Because there's really two ways that people get the certificate, a very fancy certificate you'll see at the end. And one is walk it, and the other one is ride a bicycle. Anyway, the guy on my right said, I'll do it. And I ended up, there were 4 of us that did it. So with that, I really want to get into the slides, because I think you'll find the slides pretty interesting and really give you a feel for what the Camino is like. But the main reason I went on it was in search of a grandchild. And I'm not going to tell you what happened until I get there. Okay, so you got France on the right and the Atlantic Ocean on the left. That's the journey. You pass through the big cities of Burgos and Lyon, and you probably can't see it unless you have great eyes, but right to the right of Burgos, it says San Juan de Ortega. Anybody see that? So that was my goal. Everybody else in the group, there were 4 of us from San Diego, there were 12 or so in the group that hired this bicycle company with a van to carry our luggage and get our hotels and take us to dinner. Everything was all planned out and included. Everybody else wanted to go to the bones of St. James, which are buried in Santiago de Compostela. I wanted to go there too, but I really wanted to go to the tomb of San Juan de Ortega. And I also read Iberia. And Michener said that this journey, the Camino de Santiago, is the finest journey in Spain and one of the 2 or 3 best in the world. I mean, if that wouldn't get your attention, what would? And St. James, basically you'll find out there are 3 depictions of him. One is the saint, as you know him, St. James the Greater. St. James the Pilgrim, because he went to Spain to preach. And there was a legend that he was seen during a battle in the 800s. He was seen on a white horse slaying Moors. And so there's the nickname of St. James the Moor Slayer. And if you go on the Camino, you'll constantly see those 3 depictions, particularly in the churches. And so we started east of Pamplona. You all know that because you've all run with the bulls, right? So we started there. And in the area, in the mountains, is where Hemingway, he wrote The Sun Also Rises, I believe, when he was staying in Pamplona or in that area. But he used to fish up in the Pyrenees Mountains, and that's where we started. And so the bike company basically met us in Pamplona and drove us up to the city. There are only 12 permanent residents in Roncesvalles. But it's an ancient city, and the church on the right, every night they had a pilgrim mass. So if you were starting the Camino, you could go to the mass, and you're going to see a video of that in a minute. I felt that if I was asking God to help me get a grandchild, I had to do something in return. So I had made a decision that even though we had hired this company that had a van, and if you were tired and you got a leg cramp or all those things happen to you because you're riding 50, 60 miles a day, often in the mountains, you're getting all kinds of problems. And I said first to myself, and then I said to God, I will never get in that van. If I'm humanly capable of getting on the bicycle, I want to do the whole 500 miles, Lord. And I hope in return, we'll end up with a grandbaby. And I know it's a funny way to talk to God, but that's the way I talk to God. I didn't really believe in God. I'm not sure much. A couple of years earlier, maybe I started coming around, but I certainly didn't have any deep-seated faith, or very little faith, but I had enough faith to ask God for a favor.
West.
Go west, young man.
What's your comment for today? What do you expect today, sir?
To keep out of the van. That's my goal.
Why?
Because the goal is to ride across Spain.
So the beginning of the ride was in the Pyrenees Mountains, but a lot of it was flat, and we did cross 3 difficult mountain ranges. This is not one of them particularly, but it's a gorgeous country. Hemingway probably fished in that stream or a stream like it. And you go through Pamplona, which there really isn't a lot spiritual there, and you come to the Church in the Unate. It was about 1,000-year-old building. Nobody really knew why it was built. It had Moorish features and all kinds of features, and it wasn't near a population center. But the Catholic Church got a hold of it, bought it, and turned it into a Catholic church. So if you look on the picture on the upper left, I sat for about an hour and basically prayed to God, to Christ, in the Church of St. Mary of Unate, probably looking at Christ the baby. Dear Lord, please help Martha have a baby, and I will do everything I can to do all 500 miles. Now, I'm only in the beginning of the trip, and I had no idea of all the things I was going to run into, and there were quite a few. You had to read the book, though, to find out. And by the way, if I do ever make any money off the book, it's all going to go to Catholic nonprofits. Certainly nothing, and I'm only doing this for one reason. The Lord helped me a lot and made me a believer when I really wasn't one, and anything that I can do to help anybody. Just a little side note, I was at a party 2 weeks ago, and a man came. He was related to the guy that I know, and he said, we started talking, what did you do? And I said, I did this, and I went to this dental school and stuff, and he said, and then I was in the military, and I was working in the military for 3 years. Where were you stationed? He said, I was stationed there 3 years after you left. And we became, in 5-10 minutes, we became acquainted. And he said, what are you doing now? I said, well, I wrote a book, and I'm somewhat promoting my book. And he said, really? What's the name of the book? And he took out his phone and he ordered it on Kindle. That was a month ago. I thought I'd never hear from the guy again. But I also gave him my card, which had my email address on it, or I wrote it down for him. And just this past week, Dear John, I read your book, entire book. He said, I was raised Catholic. He said, but I haven't been to confession in over 30 years, and I haven't hardly ever go to Mass. After reading your book, I'm going to get back and become an active Catholic. And I thought, if that's the only person that I touch, Father Soroki's smiling because he knows what the last chapter of the book is all about. I came back from Lourdes. I'm going to jump ahead. And why was I in Lourdes? That's another long story you have to read the book about. But in an hour and a half, I converted a Lutheran into a very devout Catholic. I mean, she decided at that meeting, an hour and a half meeting, to become a Catholic. I steered her to the RCIA program at St. Bridget's Church in Pacific Beach, and she became very devout. Well, thank you. Well, I wouldn't be up here if I didn't think God is really up there, and he cares. I mean, some of you out there have various problems or whatever. You know, I talk about the surgeon battles the 7 deadly sins. Do you know what they are? I had to memorize them. If I'm going to talk on them, I hope I can remember them. Pride, envy, wrath, sloth, avarice, gluttony, and lust. And I could, go on to why those sins are, so many of them are so big today. But I honestly think that if you reach out to God and turn your life over to God, God cares about everybody. I mean, here was this guy living near the ocean. All he cared about was making money and doing all these things. And I had degrees on the wall and honors. And I traveled to many countries at USC's expense. And why would he care about me? All I did was turn to him and say, God, I can't do it. All I want is some help from you. And it's amazing how the things that happened, the people I met. So this in 2001 is me. So 22 years ago on that trip. And it was such a great trip that this is Margaret. 7 years later, I went back. So most of the still pictures are going to be of the second trip. And she's wearing a scallop shell. All the movies are going to be from the first trip. She's wearing a scallop shell, which makes her known to everybody that she's a pilgrim. And you wouldn't believe how nice people are to pilgrims. I mean, it's almost like going on the Camino and immediately having hundreds, if not thousands, of friends. And you pass such beautiful places like this bridge in Puente La Reina, the Queen's Bridge, built 1,000 years ago. And this is at dinner that night. We stopped by to see the bridge, and you see the yellow arrow right there. That's how you know. If you get lost, you may get lost a long way. You've got to find the yellow arrow. And the next morning, that was a steep bridge to ride over, and Margaret cheated a little bit and got off the bike and walked over it. But I couldn't, could I? I had promised I would ride every foot of every foot of every mile of 500 miles. So I rode over the bridge, and it was a pretty good incline, although they got worse later on as far as the amount of inclines. And this is the next town called Estella, which is a beautiful town. So I'm going to go through maybe some slides pretty fast because I just want to say these towns are incredible. They go back thousands of years, and they all have legends, wonderful legends and stories, and the architecture in the churches is incredible. But in Estella, in every town that you go through, you've got to find the place where you get the stamp. Because when we went through that mass at the beginning that you saw, we were given a passport. And every time you go through a town, you find either a church or a bar. And they will they will stamp your passport, or you do it yourself. So this fellow, whose name is Kevin, is pointing to on the ground, and in chalk, it says stamp. And then if you look where the arrow pointed to, there's a little tiny table. And if you walk over to the little tiny table, you take out your passport and the stamp pad and you stamp it. And you will be quizzed at the end of the trip to see the dates that you were in all these towns to make sure you didn't hop on a bus and ride across. They wanted you to suffer. So you met so many wonderful people from all over the world.
Il nous en reste encore 600 pour aller à San Diego.
Oh,
Voilà.
oh.
Eh bien, écoutez, oui, très bien. À vous aussi.
Merci.
Au revoir.
A lot of them are. And this happens to be an incredible church. There's so many beautiful churches. One of the things that caught my eye were the twisted columns. When have you ever seen twisted columns like that in a church? The 12th, 13th century type thing. And some of the artistry they're done by the pilgrims is really interesting. And what happened was one day, we were told them that morning to stop at this place which had free wine. Now, we couldn't drink very much and ride a bicycle. And they didn't have any classes for us. So we took these scallop shells and put the wine in and sipped it. And there was a long line. We probably spent an hour at this stupid thing. And it got us behind schedule. So that at lunchtime that day, the lady that ran the whole show, her name was Maggie, says, okay, it's almost 1 o'clock. You've got so many miles to do. There's no way in the world you're going to make it by dinner time. They've got this big dinner planned for us. And so I'm going to come by at 4 o'clock and pick everybody up and bring you to the next town. And I just think, and that's blowing my whole deal with God. Now, God has never answered me. He just hopefully was listening, but I didn't know that. So she turns her back, and I head out from my bike in the trees, so she didn't even know I was gone. And I put my head down and started pedaling because I wanted to get as far away from the van as I possibly could. So I'm riding up these unbelievable steep hills, my legs are cramping, and I was suffering. So if you say, why did what happened to me in the tomb, which we will put parentheses around miracle. In my mind, Father Soroki, I experienced a miracle. I realize the church won't authorize it and call it a miracle, but in my mind, it was a miracle. And you'll know why I believe that in just a few minutes. So she comes, I hear the horn of the van at 4 o'clock, and it's Maggie. And I said, Maggie, she pulls me over. I mean, please get over to the side of the road. I said, Maggie, please. I said, I'm way ahead of everybody else. I can be there by dinner time, please. But let me ride. And she did. And I came in so beat up. I came in and they were having dinner, fancy white tablecloth and bottles of red wine from the Rioja region of Spain. I got a cramp. One of the first ones I've ever had in bicycling, and my foot came up and hit the bottom of the table and knocked all the wine over. So instead of having a white tablecloth, we now had a red tablecloth. So there was some suffering, Father, on this trip. And this is the second trip, of course, and when we got to the hill, and Margaret was with me on this trip, this just gives you an idea of looking down on the vineyards of La Rioja region of Spain. And that night, or when I was with Margaret, after dinner, we were taken into the caves for a very nice wine tasting. So yes, I suffered some, but I also was able to enjoy some events like this. So if anybody's ever interested in going on a bicycle trip on the Camino, certainly get in touch with me. But in this town of Logrona, which is in the heart of wine country, was just one of hundreds of beautiful churches. And they all have legends and stories. If you just take that one church and you look at it, it's a weird looking church because it's got all this plain stuff in the middle. There's two reasons for that. One is that entryway, if you can see it, all little statues, probably biblical, etc. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And they wanted to call attention to the statues in the entryway, so they left the facade totally blank. And you follow all the way up, and you don't see ornamental type design till you get towards the spires, and they're pointing to heaven. And the retablos all give a history of our faith. So we're now moving along, and you see the red arrow. We're getting pretty close to Burgos with San Juan de Ortega, but we come to this town I can't skip over. It's called Santo Domingo de la Calzada. And he was another saint who helped the pilgrims a lot. But this town is known for being the town of the miracle of the chickens. Officially, it's called the miracle of the innocent, because there's a story that says that a young man, 17 or so, was traveling with his parents, and they stopped at an inn, and the daughter of the innkeeper thought he was a handsome young man and wanted to spend the night with him, but he was a good Christian and he wouldn't do it. She was so upset, before he left, she took her father's goblet made out of silver, put it in his luggage, and then told her father it was missing. They realized somebody must have taken it. The gendarmes went out after them, found it in his luggage. He was sentenced to death. They tried to hang him, but he wouldn't die. So that they multiple times, he just kept talking and he wasn't dying from being hung. Everybody else always died, but he didn't die. So they figured that, so they better go tell the king of the area, and they tell him, and he says, if you did all that, he's got to be dead. He said, he could be no more alive than these chickens I'm about to eat. According to the legend, I'm not saying I believe this, according to the legend, the chickens spring to life. And they became honored and brought into the church in a gilded cage. And that was in the year 1200, 1300. So for the last 900 years or so, the descendants of those chickens are in the church. And even though this church is one of the most beautiful churches you want to see, people go in there and it's like, where are the chickens? But you can smell the chickens. And so this is the church from the outside. You can see how beautiful it is. It's absolutely gorgeous. There's two chickens here. Domingo de la Casada is on the left, and me with no glasses and the skin pulled back. You recognize me on the right holding a chicken. So this is Carlos and his camera.
Pero hágalo. A ver. Muy bueno.
La otra vez. Sí, ya lo creo. No lo veo, ¿eh?
Sí, está a la derecha. Tu varita no le ves la...
Sí. A ver, bueno, hija mía.
Otra vez, Maribel.
Now, the very next day, this is the hill heading towards San Juan de Ortega. And it wasn't this hill, but a hill just like this. It was flat. There was no hill as you see on the left. It was all flat, but at the top of the hill were two buildings. And there were old ancient stone buildings, and there was no shoulder. So I'm racing Carlos up the hill. I'm in first place, which maybe 20, 30 feet ahead of Carlos. And there's this man comes out of nowhere and starts looking scared as could be, and he's going like this, like, move over to the right. So I move over to the right, and I look up, and I couldn't see it because of the curve, and there's a Mack truck coming right at me, and there's no shoulder. So I purposely steered the bike into the building on the right. You're going to see a video of the aftermath. And purposely crashed the bike. But as I hit the building, not only I scraped my elbow, but I crashed downward, scraped my knee. But what I remember, I can close my eyes and see it. 12 inches from my head, I saw the rear tire of the Mack truck. So I came within 12 inches of being totally crushed by the Mack truck. And you're going to see this, evidently about every 15 minutes, a Mack truck comes by. And here is Carlos filming after they picked me up. And you're going to see some interesting things regarding the Mack truck coming by. But when the Mack truck comes through the building, I want you to look to see how much space there is between the buildings. So Carlos is
Right in the middle of the street.
Just like that. Just like
He did. We watched it. And he hit the building right as the truck hit the spot. You couldn't see it. The blind spot.
and the bike didn't get run over, so I was able to get back on that bike. Now, two things happened that day. Carlos also had an accident and scraped his knee, and Maggie washed it off, put iodine on it, and she put a big white bandage on it and taped it. Then when I fell, she came after me with her bottle of iodine, which stings like crazy in case anybody knows. But that isn't the reason I didn't want iodine. I just wanted the air to, I know that the bad bacteria are called anaerobes, and I wanted air and sun to get into the wound. It wasn't a deep wound. It was more of what we call road rash. The top layer of skin was up, but it's all bleeding about 4 inches wide. And I didn't let her put a bandage on it. In the next video, you'll see I'll see me coming down the hill. This happened right afterwards. I don't have any bandages on my knees. This is me coming down, and then you'll see Carlos. Carlos was quite the character. He let Mike do a little filming so we could get him into the movie. This is the way San Juan Ortega looked in 2001. It's the way it looked in 2008. And it's the way it probably looks today. The only difference is there was a flood there in 2005. So when I brought Margaret back to see the tomb and where the coffin was, it wasn't there. They had brought it up. So let me go take you back to 2001. We pull into town. We haven't really eaten anything but a banana or so on the way for about 3 hours of riding. And I'm starving. Everybody else is starving. There's one little restaurant just off to the left. We go in there and order bocadillas, sandwiches. And I'm eating my sandwich, and Mike disappears. He comes running back and he says, John, drop your sandwich. Now, he knew I was on that Camino for a spiritual reason, and he knew that I cared about San Juan de Ortega. So he says, drop your sandwich, go down there right away. He said, I have cancer. He said, I came early to pray at Lourdes, which Lourdes is only about a 2-hour drive or so from the beginning of the trip, which was Roncesvalles. So he went to Lourdes, prayed, and went into the baths. He said, when I was in Lourdes, I felt the Spirit of God there. I felt it was a holy place. But I have never felt the presence of God like I did in that tomb. There's something amazing going on down there. So I drop my sandwich, don't tell anybody, and I walk down this street. And I go into the church, and there's all these fancy things. Queen Isabella of Spain paid for some of them, the restoration of part of the church, because she was so indebted to him. And I ignored it and went right down, as he told me, these steps into the tomb. And the tomb was dark, and I didn't see the button which would turn on all the lights. And I go into the tomb, and there are votive candles there, and I can see that there's a coffin down below because there's 2 levels. But I had a bloody knee, and something made me kneel. All I can say, I don't know why I did it, but I immediately went in there, must have felt the presence of God if you can feel something like that. I immediately knelt, and there was an iron railing, and I started praying. So I'm looking down now, and my eyes are beginning to open. Now, this picture was taken hour later when everybody came back. They turned on the lights, but the only light I had were those 4 votive candles, and half of them were not even working, or they were out. And then you see the bottom of a wooden cross. So now I'm kneeling. I don't feel any pain. I'm staring at the coffin. I'm staring at the cross. And all of a sudden, I saw something I can't believe. And anybody that knows me, there's a few people that know me at least 40 years, raise your hands. Julie, this little group right here. I have a history of, I worked in the same, I did surgery every day in the same town, pretty much. People know that I don't go around telling lies, make things up. Never had anything like this happen before, never had it happen afterwards. But I look there and I'm praying for a grandchild, and I see a small blazing cross. No smell, no smoke. It's just a blazing cross. And then it didn't stop. It divided. So let me get rid of my clicker so I can use my hands. So this blazing cross divides. So now I got a cross here and a cross here. But the middle cross, we call it the parent cross, didn't disappear. I'm looking at 3 blazing crosses. When a sperm fertilizes an egg, okay, the egg will divide. And there's basically, now you got 2 cells. It didn't do that. It divided, but the cross stayed in the middle. So I'm looking at 3 blazing crosses, and then these divide. I'm looking at 5 blazing crosses. Then these divide, and I'm looking at 7 blazing crosses across the whole stretch of the room in front. Okay, I'm a scientist. You can go to Sottosanti, J. You see at least 20 papers in the scientific peer-reviewed literature that I've written, some of it original research. So I'm saying this can't be happening. How can I explain this? Then I said, I've been to Disneyland. I've been in Pirates of the Caribbean. I know that you go through on a boat and you trip something, and these pirates come running out in front of you, or all these things start happening. When I came in, I tripped something, and there must be a time delay because 15 minutes have gone by, and now I'm seeing a show that the Spaniards are putting on for me. Isn't that nice? So I turn around, expecting fully, because remember, this is the day when LCD and digital was just coming on. Most people were still giving their presentations with Kodak carousel projectors, little Kodachrome slides, right? So I'm sure that there's a Kodak carousel projector behind that wall, and actually a movie projector, because it was moving. And so I look behind me, and it's a solid wall. Now, how do you explain it now? It's a solid wall. Okay, I'm clear thinking, in all ways. There was no sunstroke, no alcohol whatsoever involved. So then I say, these votive candles down there in front of me, the 4, or whatever was still lit because they all weren't working, are somehow reflecting light off of my glasses, and that light is looking like blazing crosses. So I go to take off my glasses, and they were in my back pouch because I didn't wear glasses regularly. I just used them for reading. Okay, so now, what's causing it? Anybody have any ideas? I finally gave up. I said, this is incredible. I mean, this is a vision. It's the only vision I've ever had in my life. And will look anybody in the eye. I will take any lie detector test. But I had a definite vision. And that vision went on for, I would guess, 10 or 15 more minutes. But during that 15 minutes, I had this unbelievable certainty that this was a gift from God and that Martha would get pregnant and have a baby. And that's why and the only thing that happened was when the crosses appeared, it was very rhythmic. I drew it out as I was explaining it. But it was 1 cross, 3 crosses, 5 crosses, 7 crosses. If anybody plays music, you know what a metronome is. You can set it for any speed. So 1, 3, 5, 7. Thought came into my mind that they're about ready to leave. The crosses just didn't disappear. They went 7, 5, 3, 1 out at the same time. I mean, you talk about the beautiful world we live in and how God orchestrated it, created it. God can do anything God wants. It's just, our human minds can't understand it and realize it. But it changed me. I mean, I'm still changed. When I came home, Margaret can verify this, that was the days when we first bought digital cards and had digital cameras, right? So we bought a digital card that you could take 100 pictures on. So what you did is you came home, you put your digital card out of the camera into a card reader, you transferred those digital images onto your computer, then you deleted your card so you could start over fresh again, so you never have to buy another one. I did that every time for 3 years, except I only deleted 97 photos. I always left the 3 photos of the front of the church, the casket, and the cross. They're still on my computer. You can come over to my house sometime. Margaret, you going to serve everybody? Where are you? She's not smiling. But they're still there. I didn't want to delete them. They had that much meaning. So the thought came to my mind before the crosses disappeared. They may leave without me. We're going to Burgos today. That's another 20 miles. I don't want to ride by myself. So immediately I thought of that, and then the crosses disappeared, and I went back, and they were just finishing up. Never got a chance to eat the rest of my sandwich, I don't think. And then they came back and we saw the lights, and we turned on the lights. It was a different experience, and we took some photos. But it was the most amazing thing. And that's 9 months later. Okay, to be honest, it's 9.5 months. But he just went into his senior year at Yale University. So family is everything. He's 6'5", Margaret? Yeah. And who's he looking at? I just gave him the book. I don't know if I'll read it. I mean, kids don't read books, spiritual books. We'll see. If you have any ability to talk to Martha, I don't know if you will, tell Tommy to read the book. So I brought Margaret back in 2009, and I already told you things were totally different. Caskets upstairs, it's just there were people milling all over the place. And then we went on to Burgos, and coming into Burgos is beautiful. The cathedral at Burgos is unreal. It's one of the most beautiful cathedrals you could see in the world. Our hotel room, it's luck of the draw. You're assigned a hotel room by the biking company. Sometimes you get the back room looking at a cement wall. This time, I took the picture on the right out of our window, looking at the cathedral. It was that beautiful. And we pay, you pay the same amount as everybody else does every night, but we looked out in Burgos. I mean, everything is just so incredible. A gilded staircase. I could give a talk on each one of these photos because each one of them has such a history associated with it. And then you hit a terrible place on the Camino. So if anybody thinks this is a joy-filled thing, you get all kinds of blazing crosses and wine and everything else, you hit the desert called the Meseta. The Meseta is hot and dry. I mean, probably in July and August, it's probably 110. When we went through, it was probably more like 90, and we went in June, early June. And we were able to do it in 2 days at the most, and they walk it. It takes a full week to go through the Meseta. And it's boring, and fortunately, people talk to each other, et cetera. There are some beautiful scenic sites, and there is one of the signs that we're following along the way. And you occasionally come to I call it an oasis, where there'll be a church in a little tiny town and some pretty flowers. And then you get back on the Meseta and keep going. So we crossed the Meseta, which is in the middle there, between Burgos and Leon. And we had heard about the beautiful architecture in Leon, particularly the cathedral, which has supposedly more stained glass than most cathedrals by far. It is incredible. But when we came into Leon, that was the first architecture that I saw. But that gives you a little glimpse. There's 20 times the amount of stained glass of what you're seeing there on the right, because it wraps around all the sides. Are all stained glass. But it's absolutely beautiful. Now, one of the towns that we ran into is called Puente de Orbigo. And I show you some of these places because I want you to know how much charm there is. There's all these legends you can learn about and read about. So there was a night in 1434, it's been reported in a number of places, and I don't know how to pronounce Spanish, I hate to say, so I would say Suero de Quinones. Anybody could pronounce it correct? How would you say it, Joe? Okay, that's who he was. If I come to say his name again, you're saying it. Every day they say in these legends, and so many of them are written down, for 30 days, anybody that wanted to cross this bridge, they had a joust with him, and he wouldn't let them cross. And he challenged all, and he beat all 30, or everybody that he saw in 30 days. So my friend Kurt, who was one of our 4 that went from San Diego, he was an ex-fighter pilot, and so he liked to fight, in a sense. So he decides to attack Carlos, who's just standing there with a video camera. So here he comes. Let's see who wins. Okay, now you get a little feel here. We on our bikes, I've got a road bike on this trip, and the pilgrims that are walking are on the path just off. So sometimes we separate, sometimes we're side by side, sometimes there's no side path, we're going through a city and we're on the same roads together. But we go through a bunch of little hammocks like this where population 20 or 30 people, but charming little restaurants. This is a famous little albergue, which is an inn for pilgrims. For $5 a night, you get a bed and I think a bowl of cereal for breakfast. Now I want to show you your bed. There are 20 beds that I can count. Okay, those are all double bunk beds. So if you can count how many beds up on top, whatever, I think there's over 40 people sleep there. And the showers are cold. Many times there's only one shower for men and women. It's pretty rugged, but that's the ideal way to do it if you can do it over 7 weeks. Shirley MacLaine wrote this really weird book. I would not advise that you read it because she has all spiritual adventures with past lives. So I would say that the only thing I remember from her book is she said, "Oh, when I went to Fonsabadan," how do you pronounce that, Shirley? Okay, when you go there, she said the dogs attacked her, the wild dogs. So for years, I kept looking for wild dogs and looking all over the place. I never saw one dog, but later on I did see a dog. You're going to see it's kind of funny. But it was changing from the old, which you see on the left, to some new construction on the right. But the young people are all moving to the cities, so a lot of these places are barren in terms of people. But those vans were always there, and they would tempt us. We're now heading up at least a 6% grade, maybe steeper as we get to the top. It might get as high as 8 or 9. Anybody here ride a bike on a road? Any Shelley a little bit, a couple more here. So you know what an 8 or 9% grade is. It's pretty tough. So, some of the people got in, and they still, with the next town, got their stamp. But I refused to do it. Margaret did too, which surprised me. We trained on Mount Soledad up and down. We do 3 or 4 times a day. It's a 900-foot mountain. But you have to be able to climb 4 or 5,000 feet in one day. But it's doable. But at one point, the highest point of this particular mountain is what's known as the Iron Cross. And you're told earlier, when you're down in the flat area after coming through the Meseta, that you take a stone equal to the size of your unconfessed sins, I guess. I'm looking at her father. And so some people took big rocks, some had backpacks that put a big boulder in. The first time I did it was 8 years earlier than when I took this photo. I took a small little pebble, which was terrible. I mean, it should have been the biggest boulder there, because when you get to this place, you climb up to the top and dump it. So I'm letting my picture be taken, and then I said, I guess I'll dump this through. There was a medium-sized rock. I did carry that. And I climbed up there, but I totally disregarded this family that was taking a nice picture. So I'm in their family picture. And there's these cute little towns. This is a one-man town that he helps pilgrims with. And there's a cross where somebody probably died at some point doing there. And there's Margaret being nice. I asked her to imitate the statue, and she did. And there's a snow pole, because this place is covered with snow throughout much of the year. And then we had a big downhill down to an oasis, and where you could have lunch, etc. And now we're going to start climbing again. This is one of the last castles built by the Knights Templar. Some of you historians know about how the Knights Templar were very involved with the Crusades and a lot of things. And they were disbanded and accused of a lot of things they maybe did or maybe didn't do. But we were able to go there. And then we started just about ready to start the big climb. It was a big climb for you road cyclists. It was like the inside of Torrey Pines State Park, the steep part coming up seemed like at least 6 to 8%. And it seemed like it never ended. But Margaret had a granny gear, which meant she could spin. You only went about 2 miles an hour, which meant I thought you were going to fall over at any point in time, because you got to maintain a certain speed. But she made it. She's one of about 4 people of the 12 that never got in the van going up that hill. And we got to the top. Yes, there we go. We got to the top, gave each other a high five. We were so pleased. We go into this little town called Thebrero, or huh? In Spain, it would be Thebrero, T-H, I think so. And you notice the point on top of the house on the left? You notice the point on top of my head? See the resemblance? I just noticed that when I put my slides together. Evidently, they were putting a point on this one on the right, but hadn't gotten there yet. If you ever go, have this meal called, basically it's octopus. I won't try to pronounce it. I can say polpo, cone, cachelos. Anyway, fantastic food. That's the oldest church on the Camino where a Eucharistic miracle took place. I didn't until those crosses in that tomb. I didn't believe in Eucharistic miracles because I believe it was impossible. It's unscientific. And you'll see, it changed my mind.
And we're staying at an inn right next to a little Catholic church where one of the greatest miracles of the whole Camino took place. Evidently, it was during a winter storm in which a priest would have to say Mass if someone showed up, if a pilgrim showed up, and he thought no one was going to show. One lone pilgrim showed up, and during that Mass, when the priest was consecrating the host, and they had the wine, there was an actual transformation of the bread and the wine into human flesh and blood. And the chalice evidently is on display here. And we look forward to seeing that and learning more about this miracle.
Evidently, Queen Isabella of Spain loved the Camino because she also went to this village and heard about the Eucharistic miracle. And they had it displayed there. Evidently, there are fragments of flesh and blood and there's the chalice and the paten. And they were just kind of laying there, and she had built something really fancy, which you'll get a glimpse at in a minute. This is the inside of that church. And one more hill that we climbed, and then we start downhill. Now we're really getting into Galicia, which is very similar to Ireland and Scotland. Green grass, cows, drizzle, rain. And one day, they told us, well, normally we don't have cyclists go on this because it's a little bit dangerous, but if you guys, the four of you guys want to go on it, go ahead. So the four of us went on it. Here we had to go ahead and stay on the rocks because it had rained that morning. And it seemed very peaceful because the area, some of the buildings dated back to 1200, 1100. Some of the ancient plows from the medieval periods were still there. So we were enjoying all that and thought everything was tranquil until these things started coming at us. Now we're on a 4-foot wide path with stone walls on either side, as you can see. Here I go. I'm leaving. I'm out of here. I'm off to the right. But there's my bicycle. Who cares? I just rented it. But keep your eye out for a dog. I said you would see a dog later. This dog is very important to me learning how to be humble, because humility is very important. And pride is one of my biggest sins. It's probably the one that's toughest to get rid of. So, there's a dog there somewhere. Okay, there we are, Mike and I. Somewhere you'll see it. It's coming in a minute.
That's right.
The old man was just not hurting the things. Oxen, I guess. Just keeping them moving. Somewhere there's a dog. See the dog in the back? There's a dog moving across in the back. Okay. He's going to come back into the picture. I'm wearing rain pants, yellow rain pants. Dog thinks I'm a fire hydrant. Watch.
Oh, he's peeing on your pants.
And now, to make matters worse, I lie. You're going to hear it. I'm saying there wasn't much there. There was plenty. My whole sock was soaked. My shoe was soaked for the rest of the day. Maybe for 2 days. Now we're almost done. This is called Monte de Gozo. This is where a lot of people cry. It's because you can see the cathedral, which is your goal, off in the distance from Monte de Gozo. And that's really great. So we've now gone all across from France, way on the right, to Santiago de Compostela up on the northwest there. And the goal is to be at the cathedral. As soon as we got to the cathedral, we had our pictures taken. That's my passport I'm showing. But right after that, it's important before the Mass starts. There's a special Mass, if you time it right, for pilgrims. And we had to go to the town hall and get in line to show our passports. And we got to the counter and they checked every little date, time to make sure that we didn't ride the van. Then they give you a beautiful, in Latin, with your name on it in Latin, the Compostela certificate. This is the Pilgrim's Mass. You're going to see in a minute. It's world famous because this cathedral has the world's largest incense burner. It's about that high off the ground. it starts and ends. That's heavy. I didn't realize that. Watch this. I think that I was sitting right underneath that. See that big pillar? I think I was right there. There's hundreds of people underneath it on both sides. Yeah, it's quite an event. Anyway, it took me a long time to start writing it, but I decided that it changed my life. God changed my life when I finally turned to Him. So I wrote the book. And this is my website, mortaladhesions.com. And the book is on Amazon. I also have some copies here if you want them. Let's remember, the money's going to church. Not this church necessarily, but it's going to Catholic charities. And thank you for listening. Why don't you ask questions? Any questions? Yes.
You know that before you write that bodega, you're supposed to use a water bottle for that instead of using the shell.
Yeah, well, yeah. What he's saying is that we could have used the water bottles. We didn't want that. We didn't want that much wine because this was early morning and the sun was beating down on us. So we didn't use our water bottle. And then there wasn't, we had just filled up the water bottle and the van wasn't there. So it isn't like we could empty out our water bottle, put wine in it and get a new bottle of water. But you're absolutely right. Anybody else? Anybody want to go on the Camino? In the back.
Do you have any other, did she have any more children, your daughter?
I had the other two boys never did marry. So it was just the one, Martha and Mark, that Father Soroki knows, and they had two more children. So there's three of them. Two at Yale, sophomore and senior. Yes? Oh, we started at the beginning. Oh, no, we didn't, no. No, there's two places to start from, which is called the beginning. The really good place to start is Saint Jean de Port. We started in Roncesvalles. The trip was a 14-day trip. On the bike, we were on the bike probably 11 days, maybe on the bike. I think we averaged 45 or so a day. Yeah, 45 miles a day probably. Some days, if it was hilly, steep hills, we did less miles. If it was flat, we might do 65 miles. You can easily, remember, I trained a guy, not only did I train Margaret 8 years later, I trained Mike, who had never done any long distance cycling. Post-cancer treatment, we started at Mission Bay and went around Mission Bay a couple times and gradually started going up to Del Mar, gradually did the Torrey Pines Hill until in early May, a typical day for us was UCSD to Oceanside for lunch and back 50 miles. Well, 2 or 3 times a week, yes. Pardon?
Did he ever recover?
Oh, good news, yeah. Not only did he recover, but he's a permanent deacon in the Catholic Church and has been since 2008. We went to his ordination. Yeah, it's a great story, and he's a great guy. If anybody wants a book, you can get them on Amazon. About to say a little cheaper than Amazon, but that's not why I brought them. In case somebody wants to get it signed, I'll be happy to sign it for you. So it's in the back of the room. Thank you all for coming.